moving on. So, our first speaker this morning, his name is Des Traynor, the co-founder of Intercom. Please put your hands together for Des Traynor.
Time and time again, translation seems to sabotage the word.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here. It's such a beautiful city. And I'm waiting for slides. Here we go. So yes, I'm Des Traynor from Intercom, and given I know we were all out having 1 or 2 beers, 1 or 12 in some cases, I guess I'll say good morning to you, but I'm guessing for some of you it might not be a great morning. So we'll see how we get along regardless. Yeah, this is my first time at Split. It's absolutely beautiful. Definitely, if I ever have pet dragons, this is where I'm keeping them. It's quite a nice place. I'm talking about managing a product as you scale. And why scale? Well, scale is kind of what we've been dealing with in Intercom for the past 4 years, I guess, since we actually launched. Intercom is a product I started with 3 of my co-founders in 2011, and we've gone since then. We've gone from, I guess, from like 4 people to 115 people. We've gone from no customers to 4,000 customers. We've gone from no offices to 2 offices, and all of these things create all sorts of unique problems. But the biggest lessons being a product-focused company are the ones that we've learned from product itself. The best piece of advice when people ask me about what we should, we're about to start a startup, what should we do, is I really think like it sounds quite fluffy or abstract, but a really important thing to do is start on your product vision. That is, like, it's very tempting when you see people like who have success making a project management app to say, oh, I'll go and make a project management app too. Or people have a great time tracker and you're like, well, I'll make 2 time trackers. But I really think the vision is like the bedrock of everything you're going to achieve. I really like this quote from Alice in Wonderland when she comes across the Cheshire Cat. So she comes to a crossroads and she asks the Cheshire Cat, well, which way should I go? And he says, well, where are you going? And she says, I don't know. And he says, well, then it doesn't matter. And the reason I like that is because without a vision, you'll flip-flop frequently, as you've no real idea of what the future looks like, so you've no guiding light for any decisions you make. Visions can really be like, or when you talk about product vision or a company vision, it often gets very fluffy and very sort of, it's something we print on a wall, but we don't really follow. So to be more specific, what I really like talk about is like an opinion about what the future looks like. The technological trends that you want to bet on. And lastly, an idea of how you have the change that you want to make in the world. And to talk about those specifically, what does your future look like? Well, depending on the domain you're working in, there are always new and interesting changes. If you're in commerce right now, if you're selling goods, it's basically a given that the faster you can sell these goods at the touch of 1 button or less, the more successful you'll be. Real time is winning everything. Alternatively, if you're building a messaging product, there's massive shifts in messaging. You've got the decline of SMS. You've got email being reduced to like a source of truth and record, but not necessarily a source of conversation. You're seeing things like the blended asynchronous and synchronous messaging that happens, where you kind of talk to people who are or aren't online, and it doesn't matter, the conversation happens anyway. Marketing is seeing its own trends too, but the key idea is every product exists within a specific vertical, whether it's like developer tools or like hosting platforms or messaging or any of those areas, and you have to have an idea of where this is going. Otherwise, you end up building yesterday's technology tomorrow. What technological trends should you bet on? So often for a lot of startups, there are some pointed trends that are clearly emerging that you really want to either ignore the wave or ride the wave. But the obvious ones are things like, what does the Apple Watch mean for us as we build? Is the connected home, this idea of Internet of Things, this broad category that blends your toaster with your television, with your Tesla, is that a thing? But if it is a thing, what is it something that's relevant to the future of your industry? We also have wearables, which are obviously taking off in lots of different ways. There's other versions, there's other lots of other trends like this. There's like the growth of drones, for example. There is the decline in cost. So it used to cost a lot of money to do a startup, as I'm sure most of you can remember. To do like vast amounts of computing, to store high amounts of data, to access lots of data used to cost vast sums of cash. And that's why one of the bad parallels people draw between, say, the early 2000s and the bubble then, and what people talk about as being, how, I guess, frothy the environment is now. One is that, certainly it used to raise money to buy hard drives to store photos on if you wanted to build a photo sharing app. Now you're not doing that. The money you raise is much more highly leveraged, and it's wasted. It's not wasted on the undifferentiated heavy lifting that kind of was typical back then. Messaging itself has kind of been pretty funny. Every single one of these apps is somebody building the next WhatsApp, and there is no shortage of them. Someone took the time to color code them, which was great. Saved me the bother. But yeah, messaging itself is ballooning because of this. And when you see things like WhatsApp going for 19 billion, Snapchat going for potentially way more, you start to realize how big this can actually get. The third component of a vision is just what changes do you want to make. So you can have a vision of what the future for your industry looks like, and the technological trends that are coming that will support or fight against you. But lastly, so what is the kind of last piece. Why do you exist other than to make money? And I think it's a really good question to ask, because if you're successful, you'll make money at some point. But if that's all you make, you haven't really made very much. Are you actually going to make a change in the world or not is really important. And that matters for a lot of reasons, but it's just because a lot of people have different definitions of money. Some people would be happy to maybe they might make $1 million. They might be done, I'm rich, I'm off, and that will ultimately play out as vision incomplete, right? For me, it's not about goals or targets. It's not about 10,000 customers or $10 million or any of those sort of things. And it's not about being in the top 1 or top 10 or any of those sort of areas. It's simply what are you going to do independent of commercial success? So Heroku, I really liked their one when they launched a long time ago. Heroku have since exited, but they said they want to let app developers spend less time on code. And they did start a movement that meant that most developers now do not spend a huge chunk of their time stressing over a deploy. GitHub wanted to help people write better code faster. That's a slightly simplified version of it because there's a few more clauses, but the key point is, because of the existence of it, it's absolutely true that the quality of code produced in the world has changed. That's an irreversible impact on the world that's happened. Our humble goal is to make internet business personal. Stripe want to increase the GDP of the internet. There are loads of these, Instacart want to build the best way for people anywhere to shop for groceries, and Uber want to make transportation as reliable as running water. So I think vision is really important, even though it is kind of quite a high abstract concept. It's important it's your only guiding light when you make these early decisions in your product. So I also think you should start with the simplest, smallest product. I use the scalpel as an analogy for this. The scalpel is a very simple product. It's easy to market, it's easy to explain. If you do not want to know what it does, I can just rub one gently along your arm and you'll work it out really quickly. It's easy to test. If someone says here's a scalpel and I want to know if it's a good one or not, I can probably evaluate it very quickly by trying to cut something. And it's quick to build, and because it's quick to build, you can test and iterate and it'll get pretty good pretty quickly. The opposite of a scalpel to me is something more like a Swiss Army knife. And the Swiss Army knife has a lot of interesting traits, but it's hard to market because it's not particularly good at anything. If I'm hosting a dinner party and someone says, "Darling, could you get the wine opener?" I'm like, "Yes, sure." Ka-chunk. It's no longer a classy dinner party. If my neighbor says, "Hey, I'm cutting down a tree in my front lawn, can you help?" and I say, "Yes, I'll bring along my saw," and I bring this thing along, yeah, I won't be invited back for that. Yeah, that might be a good thing. But it's hard to adopt. It's basically a collection of slightly, barely useful things, and the only real utility comes from the fact that they're all together. I think it's really important with your products to start with a scalpel. And you can grow towards a Swiss Army knife if you wish, but you have to start simple. There's a great principle of systems engineering called Gall's Law, which states very simply that a complex system that works has always evolved from a simple system that works. A complex system designed from scratch never works. It cannot be made to work. You simply have to start over from a simple system that works. What that means in terms of product design is that I think your first release should be a solution to a real problem that exists. It should be something that's easy to build, test, evaluate, and refine, easy to explain, and easy to adopt for your customers. And you need to keep refining your core offering until you get there. If you start, and the most common way you'll go off course is you'll get one customer who says, I'll buy it, sure thing, no problem, $500 a month, just need one more feature. And that is like it's the easiest way to go off course and forget about your vision and forget about the idea of scalpels and keeping things simple, because the lure of cash is very attractive. But it's also worth knowing that there's a difference between making a simple product and then making a product simple. So a simple product is something that's simple in its scope, and then when you make the product simple, it's about making it as usable and easy to use as possible. To make a simple product, you decide where it starts and where it stops. The reason this is important is because products capture a subset of a workflow. So to give a simple example, if you take the user here who has to pay the team, and success for her looks like everyone being paid. So it's very tempting to think, well, what are the steps involved? We just build some software that supports those steps and we're done. And those steps can be complicated. It could be, let's check the balance, review the projects, build the clients, check the timesheets, verify the rates, blah, 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 blah. And you might think, perfect, I'll just build that entire product and we're done. But there's a risk there, because you're going to basically build way too much software, it won't be simple, and it'll be too unique to specific use cases. So you should start at the first point in the workflow where you can add new value. So if the user has all their employees in a timesheet and there's no problem, or in a spreadsheet, and there's literally no problem with that, there's no point in going and trying to reinvent Google spreadsheets. Google have more money and probably better developers. So start where you can add value. And where you choose to start, you work out what you should do to transition the user from the previous step. So if the previous step was something like, at this point they have a receipt, well then work out how you can import the receipt. And where do you stop? Well, stop when the next step is done through a market leader. And by a market leader, we mean something like, say, PayPal, Amazon, IMDb, someone who you literally can't compete with, don't want to compete with, it is not worth competing with. If the next step is completed in lots of different ways, it's also not worth doing. And I've spoken to 2 different startups who've gotten in trouble for this. They try to do salary processing. And basically there's I think about 220 countries in the world or something like that, and there's probably about 220 different ways salaries are paid. And most people already have it figured out for them, so when you try and say, hey, we're going to build the one-size-fits-all, you end up building the one-size-fits-none, and you piss away 6 months of developer time getting nowhere. Lastly, if it's something you just can't innovate on, so if the next logical step in the workflow is, well, at this point we would phone the customer. Yes, you could go and build VoIP technology into a browser, but to what end? You're unlikely to capture any value. So to take our simple example here, if this was our workflow, and I don't know what's happened there, okay, we have a second presentation trying to fight its way on. Let me see if I can do anything here. No. Okay. I'm hesitant to go on because the slides are kind of important. Oh, yeah, okay. The new clicker has opinions about what I should talk about. All right, I'll just press on. The key point being, when you take all this workflow, you shouldn't see when you have a long workflow, please don't think, well, our startup will do all of these things. You will do specific subsets of these things. So the workflow we saw previously, it is actually probably, there's a time tracking tool, there's probably an invoicing tool, there's probably an accountancy tool, and you decide which one of those you're building. And when you decide, you then say, well, all right, we're dealing with time tracking. What's the easiest way someone can get started with time tracking? And what's the easiest way we can tee them up to get the data into the accounting tool? And this is actually my next slide. No. The next point you should realize is that, I call this, are you familiar with Goldilocks, the story? Yeah. So my version of Goldilocks for product management is Scopilocks. You should have no product too big because no one will adopt it, and no product too small because no one will pay for it. But you need to find a product size that's just right. And that's when you know you're onto something pretty good. Another principle I apply that's also related to food is the cupcake principle. So I often tell people there are many different ways you can build a wedding cake, for example. Let's say you're getting married and the cake really matters to you. Well, there's two different worlds that cakes get built. In one world, what we do is we work a lot on the filling, and we have this big bowl and we whip it up and it's like salted chocolate caramel and we're really, really happy with it. And then when we're done with the filling, we put it aside and we come over and we work on the base, and we work on the sponge base, delicious tasty bread, sugar fused, etc. And then we put the base aside, and then we work on some sort of cream and cherries and toppings and stuff like that. And at the very end of the whole thing, the day before your wedding, you assemble it all and you're like, that tastes shit. And there's a danger there, because at no point anyway along the way did you have any idea if this cake was going to work out or not. So what I call the cupcake principle, it's actually an idea from Brandon Scherer from Adaptive Path, but the cupcake principle says that rather than building the cake base, then the filling, then the icing, and then finding out on your day of your wedding that you really, really screwed up, you could try building something like a cupcake and eat that, and then realize, shit, the oven doesn't work, that's why we couldn't make it. Or, hey, you know what, I actually don't like chocolate, carrot and ginger, it's a pretty horrible taste, let's try again. But you're better off making mistakes when they're small in scope, and that gives you the time to learn. And when you learn how to make a good cupcake, try make a cake, and when you learn that, try make a wedding cake, and then you can get married. The third point, along with so we said it's important to have a vision, start small, and then keep it focused. And keeping it focused is a really, really hard one to follow, and it's actually an easy one to come on stage and say. But usual product traction looks something like this. As time goes by, you get a shitload of users. Yay, right? And that's the happy version of events, obviously. But that's not all that happens. You also get a bigger vision, more competitors, a board, a team, extra press coverage, extra people, you'll attract haters, you'll get all of these other things as well. And these all contribute to things that will put you off focus. They all provide you all of these new things that you need to build, because when you started out it was just we needed to build what we thought we needed to build, no problem. But now it's like, what do the competitors have, and what do the team want to build, and what do the press say we should build, and what does Forrester say is coming next in this area, and what do our biggest customers want us to focus on, and why are we losing customers to these other people, what features do they have? And all of a sudden you have all of this new stuff that you simply have to build. And it's really dangerous, because if you do all that, you actually go right back to where we started, and you go and do this, right? Except for it doesn't look like this, because you probably don't have amazing Swiss designers on hand to create it. It actually looks more like this. It's like the file matrix. And the funny thing is, you'll see horrible products like this, and obviously this is an extreme example, but no one ever says halfway through a product meeting, guys, I have a new idea. Let's build the biggest piece of shit anyone's ever seen. That actually doesn't happen. But at the same time, these products do get built. So it's not a conscious decision. What it is a series of one-off exceptions. It's a series of, well, we'll do it just this once, or, we can make that a setting, or we can make that a preference, but we don't need to make it for everyone. And you end up causing yourself problems in that regard. And the marketing version of it is tough as well, because I don't know if you're familiar with the blind man and the elephant story, but the story is basically a lot of blind men are given an elephant to evaluate, and they only see the pieces that they can access. So you can see someone saying, it's a snake, it's a wall, it's a tree, it's a rope. This happens in software too, right? If you have a really complicated piece of software, some people will refer to you as payroll, and some people refer to you as project management, and some people refer to you as like a to-do list, because you have all of these things badly connected together. But these are all like kind of obvious cartoony examples. What feature creep actually looks like is different. Like these tired cliches, like saying, oh, Microsoft Word is obviously feature creeped. I'm like, yes, it's also one of the most commercially successful applications of all time, so let's not get too critical. But what's more interesting to me is like, what does feature creep actually mean? What it means to me is when you have a lot of features that people aren't using. So a simple way, if you have a product out there, hands up who works on a product or has a product, by the way. Just hands up. Okay, that's a lot of people. Cool. Excellent. You're in the right talk, so. But a very simple thing to ask frequently is, which of our customers are using which of our features and how often? And to do that, you simply just draw these two lines, all of the time, none of the time, all of the people, none of the people, and then just put in your main features in there and see what actually happens. And you'll see that the core of your product is usually located somewhere in the top right. That's like what people actually come to you to do. But you'll have some danger features, and I call danger features things that are either in the top left or in the bottom left, which is like features that either no one's using or worse than no one, because if no one's using it, you can just literally turn it off. Much worse than no one using it is a few people heavily dependent on it, because now you can't simply throw it away, but you also, you're not getting any value from it. So the opposite of like feature creep to me is like a product that's reasonably well-rounded. So, and what well-rounded I mean is most people are using the features we built. So most of you will start your product and it'll look something like this. 100% of people are posting updates. 75% of people are posting replies. And it's like pretty simple stuff. People are using the features you built. This is why your product's popular. And then you get this little delusion where you think, I'm super successful. I've never made a mistake in my life. Every feature I touch turns to gold. So you start adding features. And in your head, it looks like this. When you're in Photoshop, all of these features are a smash hit. You're sitting there playing with gradients and adding pixel shadows, and everyone's going to use everything. And then reality gets to kick in. And reality is a bit more depressing. Reality is that like a lot of stuff you roll out isn't actually that successful. And even this is optimistic, because the more you add, the harder your core product gets to use. The more junk you add, the worse your value proposition for the simple tasks gets. So it actually starts to look more like this. And unused features, stuff that's in there, it's tempting to call it harmless, but it's not harmless, because it slows you down, it confuses your users, makes your marketing hard, it's a new source of bugs. If you're a good product manager, you'll get rid of these things, but if you're a great product manager, you would have refused to add them in the first place. There's a great quote from Steve Jobs on this, where he talks about the importance of focus. And there should be audio here, but there is not. When you think about focusing, you think focusing is saying yes. But he says, the common conception of focusing is like, here's what we're definitely doing. But more important is actually all the stuff that we're definitely not doing. Focusing is about saying no. And when you say no, you will piss people off. But that's much better. You'd much rather piss people off than end up in a world where you have no people to piss off, right? So, one funny example of why you should be scared about what you add to your product is if you take a hypothetical feature. So you say, hey, we were going to add a calendar feature. Would you value that? Inevitably, the feedback you'll get, because you're phrasing it like that, is going to be, yes, people will value this hypothetical feature. It's like saying, do you want some free candy? They're like, sure. Because their attitude is, well, I don't have to eat it. I'll take it because it's free. So you give them the free candy, and then they're like, I don't really care. I'm not that bothered. I didn't really want a calendar. And you're like, okay, well, I'll take the calendar back. And now they're pissed off, right? This is the weird sort of asymmetry of users and their behavior. They're not as predictable as you'd like to think. You'll upset more people in trying to remove features from your product, which is another good reason why you just should not add them in the first place. If you don't do it, I like this example of remote control, where people are choosing to simplify everyday products by cutting out all of the crap that they never use anyway, just to show the few pieces that they do. When I first saw this example, I was like, that's pretty funny, I should use that in a talk. But then I was actually, no, I'm going to go and do this as well. It's actually way simpler to not have to deal with this crap. But the key point for me is that great products are focused, and because they're focused, they have this cohesive value. When you use everything in a product, I mean, it's all connected, you get maximum value. That means your customers are not likely to quit, they're likely to be happy to pay more, and your product team are likely to focus their efforts on things that are actually valuable. And my last piece is just about fighting for usage. So it's very tempting to roll out features that somewhat flop and then just forget about it and move on to the next thing, whereas you actually really need to fight for usage, and if you don't succeed, you need to kill the feature. So roadmaps are probably the source of most arguments in product companies. They're basically what upset people, because you have two types of roadmaps. You've got ones that are accurate and they piss off everyone, or you've got ones that are fantasies and everyone's happy but nothing ever gets built. And you're better off having the former, at least being honest with yourself. Nothing is more exciting than adding new features and more features to a product. But if you only add new features and more features, what you'll get is a lot of sizzle, a lot of marketing sort of coverage, a lot of splash and popularity. But you'll have a product that's really, really wide but very shallow. Like, it does a lot of things but not a lot of things well. You'll have the biggest product, which should never be your ambition, but you won't have the best product, which should. What that looks like this is a funny little example I saw recently, how a product can just over time just grow all this extra junk that people don't need, don't value, and you're trying to charge for it and they're not happy, and that's basically what happens when you don't say no to things. When you launch these new things, what you have to do is always be asking, who's using this, how are they using it, how can we get them to use it more? So if we take this example here and we say there's a feature here, let's say this is whatever you roll out tomorrow, and you've got most of the people using it rarely, and that's your usage. Your options here, if this happens to you, are you can fight to increase adoption, so get more people using the feature. And what that looks like is you want to talk to all the people who do use it, find out what are they using it for, get good customer stories, get good use cases, and use them to explain to everyone else, here is how customers are being successful with this feature. We would love to know, we would love you to try this feature. If you try it and it doesn't work out, we want to know why. If there's barriers to using it, let us know what they are. We can overcome them. But you have to fight to get your users using the stuff you build. And if they're not using it frequently, you have to make the exact same argument. It's just like, I notice you only upload a photo once every 20 days. Is it too slow? Is it, what could possibly make you do this more often? What trigger points or what habits or what what types of engagement are missing that limit your behavior here? Because we want all of it. And if you can't do any of those things, you have to get rid of the feature. And again, as I said, you'll piss people off, and that's okay. Much better piss people off and have people to piss off. In summary, that comes back to this, which is get more people using it or get people using it more. And that's probably when you look at your roadmap, the best way to evaluate, are you on track to build a big product or a great product, is to ask yourself, are we trying to do this, or are we just trying to add more features? The only exception is sometimes you want to improve a feature. So you're happy that everyone uses it and it works fine, but you do want to make it better. And a simple way to do that is just to do what Tony Ulwick calls the opportunity index, which is, it basically asks, for any given feature, work out how important it is to your customers. You can survey them, ask them, but how important is it to them? And then how satisfied are they with it? And it's the combination of those two that tells you what the opportunity is. So people can be really, really annoyed about how awkward your "I forgot my password" function is, but that's probably not that important a feature. So putting 6 months into making a 3D augmented reality version of it, it's probably not that valuable. Similarly, people might be thoroughly satisfied with, say, your upload photo function, but it's probably if you're a photo sharing app, it's probably the most important thing you have. So it will always be at the top of the list. Any improvement there will be experienced by everyone, always. And that's just, so along with fighting for usage, you should also look for opportunities to deliberately improve the core UI features, the core features that you have. If there's one sort of takeaway from this, it's that if you have a product roadmap, which you should if you have a product, you should look for 4 types of work. And the 4 types boil down to you should be making features better, which we just talked about, getting more people to use them, getting people to use them more, and when you feel you have a good balance of that, then you can consider adding new features, but not before. If you do it before, you will be going straight down to Swiss Army City. So that was my talk. If you want to follow me on Twitter or Intercom, there's some deets there. If you'd like to see the slides from this, I'll happily share them. Just email des-slides. There's some other links there you might find interesting. And other than that, I just want to say thank you. I love this city. It's been wonderful to be here. Thank you.